Hello. So this short video is going to help connect some of the concepts that we've learned in the past few modules. So really specifically in relation to how everything comes together with population pyramids. So I'm going to do this a little bit out of order because this was actually the second part of your population unit. But I'm going to start with this and talk a little bit about the demographic transition model, how it relates to population pyramids, and how that relates to the questions in your current module that you're working on this week. So this will serve as a nice little review and just kind of putting everything together. So the demographic transition model is really going to talk about, how long people live, and then different demographic characteristics. So here is our model, and this is a nice graph. It's actually two. So this top part is a totally separate graph just showing total population as a country or society moves through stage 1, 2, 3, and 4. So what this shows you is that total population, this y-axis here, is just very low in stage 1. And it's kind of a squiggly line here. It's probably going to be due to things like famine, different types of factors. And then stage 2, you can see there's a kind of an explosive population growth. Stage 3, we're still having population growth, but it's not quite as explosive. And then stage 4 here, like think a more developed country, richer country, again, it kind of hits equilibrium. So it's steady, higher total population. So now if we're to look specifically at the demographic population transition model graph and see why did population increase the way it did in these different stages, we can see that stage 1 here, you have very high birth rate and high death rate. So overall, there's not a lot of growth because a lot of babies are being born, a lot of babies are dying. Then you come down here into stage 2, birth rate stays high, but death rate takes a dramatic drop. Stage 3, birth rate comes down to match death rate, and that's why you hit that equilibrium again in stage 4. So what we really want to do is figure out how, I'm just going to scroll down to stage 1, how the stages reflect different shapes of pyramids. So that stage 1, where we have high birth and high death, both are about 40 per 1,000 per year. It's slow population growth because they kind of even each other out. High rates of communicable diseases. And then the reason why it fluctuates is because you might have increases in good years and declines in bad years. Could be famine, diseases, problems with crops. And just remember, no country or world region is in stage 1 today. And that's because any country that is like technically this would be a triangle population pyramid because you have lots of births, not as many older people up at the top. And if it's stage 1, it might even kind of have concave sides, but you just can't classify it as stage 1 anymore because they all will have a slowing death rate due to the diffusion of medical technology and innovation from the more developed countries. So stage 2, this triangle is going to basically look like a triangle, the most true shape of a triangle. You're going to have high birth rate and high death rate in stage 1, but then in stage 2, still high birth rate, dramatically declining, like this death rate takes a dip, and this space in between represents, the natural rate of increase and the difference between all of these births, but then there's not the deaths to even it out. So boom, explosive population rate. So if you see a country with a triangular population pyramid, you can assume it might be in stage 2. And some of the reasons, I'm just going to go over this briefly because you already saw this in your unit a couple weeks ago, or your module, but that has to do with less death because there's better food, and there's less death because of technology, basic sanitation, things like, remember the video you saw of Jon Snow, who created that map to find where the cholera outbreak was in London? That's because there was a sewage line right next to the water pump. So figuring out things like, oh, like we don't really want like poop and pee to leak into our water because that will make us sick. Like just basic germ theory. Before this time, there was like a lot of death from childbirth, and they called it childbirth fever, and it was actually caused by the doctors just not washing their hands before they assisted in birth. So at this point, they're knowing things like this, and so a lot less people are dying. And stage 3, so you can see why stage 2 was a triangle, because if a lot of people are being born still, but less people are dying, you can see how it might be a triangle. And I have some things to show you that'll make that more clear. But stage 3, just to kind of review this before we connect it to the population pyramids, now the birth is going to come down to match that declined death rate. Death rate is still going down a little bit more, but birth rate really comes down sharply in stage 3. So this is where you're going to see a population pyramid start to change its shape a little bit. It's not going to be this clear, wide base that narrows towards the top. And so why did the birth rate drop? Sometimes it's lifestyle changes called the fertility transition, women not having children until older. A huge part of this is urbanization, because when you were living in a rural area in a farm, you wanted to have as many kids as possible because, for one thing, high death rate of children, so not all of them are going to live, but mainly they needed workers on their little farms, and children were labor force for them. You know, they have that saying, many hands make light work. So if you had 8 children and they all help on the farm, that's great. But when we have everybody moving into the factory areas to work, and again, children did work, but they didn't make nearly what women who made less than men, and especially not nearly what men made. So when you're living in a small tenement apartment and you and your children work in the factory, you don't have room for a lot of children, and now they're more of a financial liability than a financial asset. So lots of different reasons why that birth rate comes down. Now finally, this is where the shape of the pyramid is really going to change and be almost more like rectangular. The top won't be as different from the base. And think of this as more economically developed countries. But there is a hypothesized stage 5, and this is what relates to the population pyramids in this week's module, those questions that seem kind of out of the blue. It's kind of like, okay, after stage 4, a country like China or Japan, or some of the other small European countries that might be going, now all of a sudden the base of the pyramid is smaller than certain parts that are larger. So that's kind of where that relates, but let me look at some actual pictures of pyramids with you. So let me go over to this one. So looking at our population pyramids, just to kind of get an idea where these shapes are coming from. So the very base of the pyramid is very young. That's children. And they're children that are usually considered dependents because they shouldn't really be working. Age 15 up until 65 is considered the economically active workers. So if you have a really high base on the very bottom here, that's going to be a lot of young children. However big the middle section of a pyramid is, that's kind of your workers, your economically active people. And then whoever is grouped at the top of your shape here, the top of your pyramid, is going to be the older people, and they are also considered dependent. Now, for example, if you have a more economically developed country, all of these people, because usually more economically developed countries have social security systems. Basically, what it means is the economically active people pay into social security. Now, when they get older up here, after like 65, in the US, I think you can actually get it at 62 or 63. It's like early social security. They're trying to change that right now. You get a amount of money every month. Now, for some people, that's going to be 600, 1,000. Some people that had higher incomes and had a higher amount coming out of their paycheck when they were working, they might get more, even like a couple thousand. It's not really enough with the cost of living today for someone to support themselves, but they paid all through their youth and working years. They're not working anymore. They're taking that fund. So that's why they're considered dependent. Now you can see this could become a real problem if the shape changes and there's less people here and more people up here. So if there's more people up here, less people up here, it kind of looks like a upside down pyramid. You don't have enough paying into that, and Social Security starts to collapse. And that's what's happening in places like China. So that's how it kind of relates to this week's questions. So anytime you see, like I said, a wide base that narrows towards the top, that's going to be less economically developed. If it looks more rectangular, they're going to be more economically developed. Now, kinks usually represent something that happened, like a war. There's usually some big historical event or something that you can pin for that. So let's look at Niger from 2016. So if we just look at this population here, we can see that it has a very wide base. Notice that the three longest bars are at the bottom of the pyramid and represent ages 0 to 14, so those children. As these children age, there'll be more people in the older categories, but there will also be likely a greater number of children born as these people reach childbearing age. So it results in really like explosive population growth. This is one of those ones that maybe you would say, oh, it's stage 1 because it's like concave, but it isn't, because we know that no country is in stage 1. But this is a very developing country, not a lot of older people, high birth rate here. So we can look at this, we can say this looks very much like a triangle. This is stage 2, and this tells us it's a less economically developed country. So this was the German population in 1946, and it's basically a post-World War II pyramid of Germany showing how much there was a loss of life of males and females in the 20 to 40 age cohorts. Greater loss of men than women because mostly men fought in the war. And then you can actually kind of see the birth deficit during the war in the 0 to 4 cohort. So if you get a wacky pyramid like this, there's usually some explanation. Other abnormalities is like baby booms and busts. So 1980, these are the baby boomers. There's a whole bunch of people born right after World War II, and they're at childbearing age right here. So they're having babies. This is the baby boom. Now over here, we have an echo. This is basically like me. This would be like my mom, the baby boomers, and dad. They had so many babies that there's an echo boom, which is kind of like the older millennials. So that's usually what that is. And then the other main pattern to notice is something like this, where there's a like kind of offshoot in the working males. Whenever you see that, an offshoot of working on the male side here, it's usually going to be immigrants migrating to work. Most, long distance permanent migrants are males around this age. So that can kind of tell you that. So those are abnormalities. And then, so if we look at this, what might explain why this is so asymmetrical? So we're not just looking at the shape, we're like, what is this crazy thing here? It looks like a really high population of men in their working years. So again, probably a large guest worker population. So really, it's just a matter of putting it all together. The last thing that I want to show you, well, let's just look at a couple here so we can see Guatemala. This is a triangle, right? We can tell there's a lot more children being born than the dependency ratio. No fear at all of there being more older dependents than working class. So we're like, this is a triangle. This is probably stage 2. And that means rapid population growth. Now, if we see a population pyramid like this is not like a perfect triangle. It's starting to get that rectangular shape. So it's so rectangular at the base here that we could probably assume that this is a stage 4. And that means stable or declining, depending on how far along it is. Now, let's see if I have a stage 5 on here. Okay, so this is kind of getting into where, look at all these people that are above the dependency ratio up here on both sides. And you have quite a bit of like older workers, but these people are nearing retirement. And this chunk of workers, these young workers, is very low. So when these people are at the very, very top here, these people are going to be the main economically active. There's not enough. There's more older dependents than economically active. And it seems to be a trend of less and less. So this could be considered stage 5. You can see it's not only rectangular, it starts to be an upside down pyramid. And that's going to mean declining growth. Okay, so we can kind of put this all together now. Let me just show you this last little bit. So this is what you're on this week, and I feel like it was a little confusing the way I have population pyramids questions under this. But basically, the point is to see some of these countries. Singapore is a great example, Japan, places like Iceland. There are some Western countries, Western and Eastern European countries, and China, it's partly because of their one-child policy really backfired that they used to have. But basically the point of this video is to relate that a society that has a declining population growth is going to look like this. So just kind of testing your knowledge, this is going to be the opposite of the type of country in the video up there. With this population pyramid, it's going to be, kind of have to think which one of these countries is going to be less economically developed. Not China, because we just saw in the video that they are more economically developed, like richer, but the main point is that they have a declining population. If you know anything about Afghanistan and a lot of the, instability they've had. They are a poorer country right now. They are developing, so it could be that one, definitely. The United States is a highly, economically developed country. We are not stage 4, we're stage 5. I'm sorry, we're not stage 5, we're still stage 4, which is a good thing for Social Security and everything. And the reason why we do not go into stage 5 or have any risk of that is because we have a robust migrant worker population that helps fill in that younger, economically active bracket. India, there are parts of India, if you took it isolated in rural India, that are like stage 2. There are parts of India that are very rich and function as a stage 4 or 5, but as an average, India averages out to like a high 3 or a 4. So it looks like, we have like a stage 5 up here, 4 or 5, depending on how you define it. So it's going to be Afghanistan. So if you see that, it's like which of these countries is less economically developed. Now this one, what do we got here? Is it a rectangle? It kind of seems to be a rectangle that's getting more into like an inverted triangle. So what does that tell us? This could be a population pyramid that was represented in the video. So these next two are really tricky because they're really close. And you're kind of just guessing here, but it's just, kind of for fun. So this one is kind of a tough one because you're like, it's kind of rectangular. It's getting a little bit inverted, but it's still like the bulk of it kind of has this triangle shape. So, it's becoming really, it's into, well into through stage 3, and certainly like approaching stage 4, although it still has so much of a triangle characteristic. So this one is kind of tough. This one, if you chose, the United States or India, that was really close, but this is actually India's population pyramid. And then this one, you can see this one is going to be a little more economically developed than the one above in India because it's really more of a true rectangle. Whereas this one up here, it's like turning into a rectangle, meaning it's like late stage 3. It's getting into stage 4, but it's still so triangular on top. So that's really tough. And this is really challenging. But this one here, it's really a triangle. But you do have a good amount of people to pay into the older type of Social Security dependents up here. So this is a pretty stable stage 4, and this is actually the United States. So I totally understand if anybody was frustrated about these questions. They're really difficult, but that's basically how it relates is to the video, kind of showing a little bit more of a case study of a country with a declining birth rate, and then relating back really to development with the demographic transition model, how countries move through the demographic transition model and become like represented by different shapes of pyramids. So hopefully this helped, and just let me know if you all have any questions. Thank you.